Welcome to Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stevie Garofalo. Today we want to talk about evil thrives before it's expunged. And Jesus makes it clear that evil must thrive before God expunges it. Jesus does not say, listen, it's inevitable that stumbling blocks come, in verse 7, but later he indicates that evil thrives before it's expunged. Chapter 24, verse 6. So verse 7 indicates both God's providential and superintendent's oversight of stumbling blocks and human responsibility for them. We have some culpability in there. Verse 8, Jesus warns us, listen, his followers could cause themselves, that's us, spiritual harm by their own, that's our own, imprudent behavior. Humble us. When we fail to strive to be humble, we fail to have an innocent faith in Jesus. And in turn, this causes us to sin, and as a result, evil thrives. When left unchecked, sin spins up. Evil spins up and increases until God sets us in a position to where he has to expunge that evil. Evil, by the way, is different than sin. Evil is a deprivation of something. Morally speaking, it's a deprivation of God's goodness. Could be sexual deviancy, could be poor business practices that are unethical according to biblical standards, but it's a lack of goodness, a lack of those principles. When we see all the cooking the books and we see unethical things in the news, whether it's business or government or people's individual lives, it's evil because it's against the good ways of God. And in the end, God often allows evil to spin up to levels that thrive and multiplies and seems insurmountable before. He does what? He expunges it. I think that's what's going on right now. And everyone's going, what's happening? Our country's going, we got taken over. No, we need to get taken over. Let me be clear. We allowed ourselves to be taken over because we got soft. But Jesus does not state why evil's allowed to thrive before it's expunged. I would say only that it will eventually be expunged. And I would say that's evil. Speaking of evil, I would say we have free choice. God doesn't want to make robots. He didn't make us robots. We have free choice to do the right thing or not the right thing. And when we choose to do more of the less of the right thing and more of the wrong thing, it spins up. You see what happens? It gains centrifugal force, so to say. The word expunged, by the way, means to erase or remove completely, usually speaking of something unwanted or unpleasant, like evil. See, we see most vividly this in the story of Noah, right? The flood, or Sodom and Gomorrah. And in this contemporary sense, speaking of today, one can ask to have his criminal record expunged so that one can apply for a job and it won't show on his record. The government knows what it is, but for the public record, there's no record of what he or she has done, and to carry out a more normal life once they're rehabilitated. Evil thrives with an arrogant heart or spirit that fails to humble. Matthew 18 in whole contains the fourth of five discourses in Matthew's gospel. That's with chapter 5, 1 to 7, and then 27, and in chapter 10, 1 to 42, and it goes on. The theme this discourse is humility. See, Jesus outlines 5 reasons that humility is essential. First, humility is essential for entrance into the kingdom. Chapter 2, verse 3. Second, humility is essential for greatness in the kingdom. Verse 4. Third, humility is essential to prevent offenses. Chapter 5. Or verses 5 to 11. Fourth, humility is essential to carry out the proper discipline in the church. Verses 5 to 20 as a whole. And fifth, humility is essential for forgiving one another. Verses 21 to 35 covers just about the whole chapter there. Going back to a major source of evil, we ought never to think of ourselves as great. Jesus makes clear that the greatness in the kingdom implies rank. Okay, a concept implied by Jesus himself in Matthew 5:19. While still in the city of Capernaum, the disciples asked Jesus a question they had undoubtedly been pondering for themselves for some time, which was this: who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? The disciples were still anticipating an earthly kingdom, and they were wondering what, great positions that they would be able to soon have in this new political order. Jesus was, presumably, they misunderstood his coming. They thought Jesus was going to rule right there. The Jews were going to rule, and the Romans were going to be, the other end of the stick. In response, Jesus took none other than what? A little child. The Greek word for little child, by the way, is paidion. Paidion. Now, children in biblical times, by the way, had no rights according to the law at that time. And Jesus stood that little child before them, telling his disciples that a change in their thinking was necessary and that they needed to expunge their evil thinking about their wrongful perception of greatness before he would level set them. Gave a fair warning. I'd submit, ladies and gentlemen, that in the 21st century, Christianity is in the very same position that, we need some change, thinking of something necessarily to do now, not in the future. We need to be better understand that greatness within the context of the kingdom is to be a servant, not to be the greatest in the world of the eye and the eyes of the world. As something is not based on great works or words of polished itinerant speakers or pastors or preachers, but in light of a childlike, humble spirit. When we fail to do so, evil increases, and then evil thrives to epic proportions before God then comes down in judgment to expunge it. He will deal with the church first, then he will deal with the not church later. That's not enough that's a word, but I just made it up. Furthermore, Jesus makes clear that evil must thrive before God expunges it. Jesus does not say why it's inevitable that stumbling blocks come, verse 7, but later he indicates that evil thrives before it's expunged. 24:6, verse 7, by the way, indicates both God's providential and superintendent's oversight of stumbling blocks and human responsibility for them. In verse 8, Jesus warns that his followers could cause themselves, that's us, you and I, and others, listen, they will end up causing ourselves spiritual harm by our own doing, by our own imprudent behaviors. You see this in today's world too much regarding how we treat innocent little children. Listen, the church is being more and more diluted. It's being led to acquiesce to culture as opposed to changing culture. Saying more often, evil is for personal and political gain, in effort to gain power and influence, increase wealth through distorted corporate and government policies and systems, or just abuse thereof, because no one's there to police it properly. Now, Jesus tells us in verses 7 to 11, and in Mark as well, he says the same thing in Mark 9, 43 to 48, that the judgment of God would fall on them because they were failing to deal with the basic cause of their sin and evil. In other words, God may be patient, but it's not a matter of if, but when God level sets us. And this is why sin is allowed to thrive before it's expunged. That answers the question. Listen, I'm not the message, only the messenger. Appreciate your tuning in. Make sure you leave your comments below, and I promise I'll get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If you happen to be, well, first of all, check out our website, reasonfortruth.bible, reasonfortruth.org. If you're listening on podcast, make sure you give us 5 stars again and in iTunes, and maybe a little write-up. Now, if you're listening by way of video, you want to make sure you do a couple things. Number one, you want to make sure you subscribe. Man, just go, bam, hit that little, it's right down there. Just hit it. Then give the Gonzalo Sinistro left Italian hook, man, to that little alert bell. The alert bell says, it's going to say, you got a new episode coming on up over here. All right, Steve, listen, that's Italian for left hook, and then you might get a little something to eat with it. Can never tell you what's coming out of that thing. But either way, that alert bell will tell you a new episode has popped up. Appreciate you tuning in with me today. Listen, until next time, we'll see you for the next episode of Reason for Truth. I'm your host, Stephen Garofalo, and this is your Reason for Truth for today.